So welcome back. It's the second part of our panel discussion, and again, welcome. The next presentation will be done by Professor Axel Lijoie from the Catholic University at Leuven, Brothers of Charity in Belgium. And his theme is digital sharing of spiritual information in healthcare. Under what condition? Axel Lijoie is full professor of care ethics and practical theology at the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies at the Catholic University in Leuven in Belgium. He's a member of the research unit Pastoral and Empirical Theology and holds chair of the Brothers of Charity for Theology. And he's a specialist for mental health and disability as well. His research, teaching, and service focus on ethics of spiritual care and in the care of people with mental health problems or intellectual disabilities. And one of the recent publications in 2019, Worten in Dialog, Ethik in de Zorg, is that maybe close, yes. Maybe, good with Lanu Campus Publishers.
Yes, that's Values in Dialogue, Ethics in Care. Thank you very much for this nice introduction.
First, Axel, could you please share your presentation in presenter mode? Otherwise, we could see all your emails coming in.
In presenter mode, I don't know how to do that.
Do you see the 88% in your PowerPoint? Below the right button.
Yes.
And yeah. the button next to it left. If you left to 88%. Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Okay. Is it perfect. Right so? Okay, yes. Thank you very much. For this talk, I thought at the next question that could be interesting for us doing chaplaincy. Digital sharing of spiritual information in healthcare, under what conditions can it be justified? So I will first try to explain a little bit the question. It's a tension between two possibilities. The first one is the confidentiality of the information that belongs to the old tradition of religion, where spiritual care happens in a sanctuary place. I think of the tradition of asylum and the tradition of the seal of confession in the Catholic Church. That means that for spiritual care, there should be a strict confidentiality because it concerns our relation towards God, towards the holy. So in a healthcare institution, then the pastor is seen as a religious reference person, coming from outside, coming from the church. And he is, so to say, an eccentric care provider. Not eccentric that he is so very special, but that he is outside the center of the care collaboration, not belonging to the care team or the care network. Here we see important values at stake, trust relationship, respect for autonomy, and respect for privacy. So this is one point of view that is more traditional, linked to church communities. But of course, we work now in a healthcare system, in secular societies, and here we have a wish to exchange information because we work with integral care, you know, the biopsychosocial and spiritual model. And to deliver that integral care, we work in an integrated way, in collaboration, in a team or a network where we share information. So pastors are asked to share their information with their fellow care providers. The pastor is becoming a fellow care provider, and people expect that he or she does share his information, and also in a digital way, in the digital file of the patient. Here we see other values at stake, the value of good care, protection of integrity and health, and justice in a more social context. So when I look at the literature, and there is not so much literature on that, there are 2 points of view. The one is in favor of a joint confidentiality in a team. I would like to distinguish between a team and a network. A team are care providers working in one care unit. That means that it is a fixed group of care providers working for a fixed group of care users. And that makes it very easy to discern who are the care providers and who are the care users. For a joint confidentiality in team, there are only a few conditions, and the question is, what is the position of the pastor related in relation to these conditions? In recent developments towards community care, we work with shared confidentiality in a network. And a network consists of care providers from different teams, from different care units, from different facilities care organizations. That makes that collaboration is much more difficult and much more extended. There is no one fixed group of care providers for a fixed group of care users. The network is functional, and the partners are different per care user. So in that view, we need stricter conditions than in the joint confidentiality in a team. And again, the question, are these conditions also at stake for the pastor? Now I would like to make my own option, and my option is one for a conditional shared confidentiality in a team and in a network. So my point of view is that we need one concept, because working with two concepts makes it difficult, that we have new questions about, is this a team or is this a network? So the same conditions for a team and a network, and in principle, also the same conditions for all care providers, including the pastor or the chaplain. So then I come to my results of my reflection, my ethical reflection, that is based on short literature research, but also on the discussions in an ethics committee in mental health care at the Brothers of Charity in Belgium. And we came to the conclusion that we need a concept of conditional shared confidentiality with three conditions. The first one responds to the question, who is belonging to the team or the network? And our point of view is that there should be a clear demarcation, so that for the care user, it should be very clear who belongs to the team and to the network, or to the network, and who has access to that information. If the care user does not know who belongs to the team or the network, then his confidentiality is not respected. So there should be a clear demarcation of the care providers sharing confidentiality. And all these care providers should be under individual confidentiality. That is a guarantee that they will not bring the information broader than that team or network. And all these care providers should be in an actual care relationship. That means that they are effectively collaborating in care with the other persons, and that they have a personal trust relationship with the care user. What are the consequences of this first condition, of the demarcation? Well, telling that there is a demarcation is not sufficient because it is not clear and you can forget it. The only way to have a very clear and transparent demarcation is that we record the participants of sharing confidentiality, the participants of the team or the network. We can only make that very transparent if we put the names or the functions in the digital individual care plan of the care user. Their names or functions should be written in that digital care plan. This has the advantage that all persons have permanently access to the names of people who are sharing information. And also, the care user should have access to his digital individual care plan and see at each moment who is participating in the shared confidentiality. When it is written in the digital care plan, we have also the possibility to adapt it at every point in time. What are the consequences for the pastor? That the pastor should be included in that demarcation, so that the function of the pastor or the name of the pastor should be written in the digital care plan. That is the first and very difficult condition to meet. The second is, how can we do that? And our answer is through dialogue and with consent. So there should be a dialogue with clear information on what it means, conditional shared confidentiality. We should justify the conditions to the care user. And in particular, we should explain who is belonging to the team or the network and is sharing that information. So that dialogue with clear information is very important, but we live in a secular society with many laws. So in that legal approach, we see in all Western countries that informed consent is very important. So it is impossible to ask informed consent at each time. So what we can ask is an express prior consent to the care user for sharing information for a certain period of care. What is a certain period of care? That is the period of care that we discuss in the dialogue. And then when we share information during our work, we can rely on an implied consent during that period of care. What are the consequences? That we may not share information tacitly. I think in practice, we are sharing information in many countries in a tacit way among care providers without our care user knowing it. I think we are charting also as care providers a lot of information without the care user knowing it. That is not respectful. So no tacit sharing and charting. What does that mean for the pastor? Well, my fundamental option is same rules for the pastor as for other care providers. But as we have seen in the first slide, there is an expectation of very high confidentiality in relation to the chaplain, because of our tradition of confidentiality in the church, the refuge, the sanctuary place, the seal of confession. So I think for the pastor it's the same condition, but if the pastor feels that he's sharing very sensitive information, then I think it's better for the pastor to ask explicit current consent and not only to rely on the prior consent, but in that case, to ask once again an explicit current consent. Third condition, what shall we share? And here I propose to use the relevance filter. That means that when we have demarcated the team or the network, when we have explained everything towards the care user and have his or her prior consent, that the consequence is not that we can share all information we know. No, we have to filter the information so that we share only the relevant information and not the pleasant information. It can be very pleasant to share stories about the care user, but we should filter the information and only give and share the information that enhances the responsibility of the other care provider towards the care user. So what does mean relevant? Relevant means in ethical terms that it enhances the responsibility towards the care user. So here I see a difference between relevant and pleasant in relation to nice to know and need to know. Need to know is too strict for me. Need to know is only what is necessary. But I think good care requires more than necessary information, so also the relevant information. And for the pastor, I think there should be a very strict application of what is really relevant from the spiritual care for the other care providers. And finally, I think there is an exception. There is an exception to this rule if there is serious and threatening harm. But the first condition for that exception is the impossibility of dialogue and consent. That means that we try to inform and motivate as much as possible, but that we cannot explain it and that we do not receive the informed consent of the care user. Second condition, serious and threatening harm to the physical or psychological health or integrity of the care user or whatever other person. Here, the protection of the person and justice are at stake. And finally, proportionality. There should be a reasonable relationship between the harm we try to avoid and the harm we create by breaching the trust relationship. That means that we do not share more information than necessary. And here I think necessary is essential. No more than necessary and to no more persons than necessary. This in order to respect privacy. So I hope with these three conditions, I can give an answer to the shared confidentiality as well in a team as in a network for all care providers, including the chaplain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Axel EuARe, for this presentation on a very pressing issue in all European countries where chaplains are involved. And I'd be really interested in learning from Muslim and humanist spiritual counseling and chaplaincy on questions of confidentiality and sharing information. But please go ahead with comments and questions. And again, I'd say we have 5 minutes time. I hope that you're all okay if we have 10 more minutes to the closer of our complete session. Okay, so okay. I'll open the discussion.
Well, thank you very much. That was very insightful. I was wondering if this concept of sharing more information with other team members or care providers needs any kind of new or different regulations in the churches where you're at. So for example, in Germany, I know that this would create some sort of legal issue inside the churches because the seal of confession is valued higher than sort of regular confidentiality.
It's a good question. I have to clarify that this is only for healthcare institutions. When you work in a parish, then you don't have that system of collaboration. I think then we need to respect in the first place confidentiality, and there cannot be shared confidentiality about the people working together in the parish. It's a special regulation because we are working here in a healthcare system. And there is a whole discussion, integrating, is that good for care for chaplains? Some people think if we integrate, we will lose our identity, the unclearness about our identity. Other people say if we don't integrate, we are not legitimate in the secular healthcare. In the parish, there are other rules. But the seal of confession, let us be clear, is only in the confession. And there the confidentiality is absolute. I think most talks between a chaplain and a client are not in a seal of confession. It's less than 1%. But nevertheless, there is an influence of that seal of confession on the position of the chaplain. And people expect much more confidentiality of the chaplain than of whatever other care provider. We see in Belgium, for instance, we have trust persons, confidential persons, ombudspersons. They are bound to the confidentiality. And nevertheless, some clients, whatever is their religion, they prefer to confide very special information to the pastor because they expect much more. So my first point of view is that we have to protect confidentiality.
Okay, Sebastian, do you want to add something on that?
Well, I'm not absolutely sure that that would actually work, for example, in Germany, mainly because it is still an ongoing discussion on whether, like how would a confession be marked, for example, if you like don't follow like a strict confession protocol in some sort of a ritual form. What would constitute that a statement that the patient makes is a confession and therefore falls under the seal of confession rather than just a confidential information. I think that is very hard to distinguish, especially like if you have specific regulations for the seal of confession, which you do have in Germany.
But here I was talking about collaboration in the care sector, in a hospital.
But I mean, you can have confessions in a hospital as well.
Yeah, but when it is really a confession, then according to the rules of the Catholic Church, it's an absolute confidentiality. That is clear. That is clear. But here I am talking about charting, about sharing information. Yes, I cannot explain everything, but the seal of confession is out of this discussion. That's something quite different with its own canonical rules. And let us hope that the secular legislation recognizes to a certain extent that canonical rules. That's another discussion. There are ways of negotiating on how to deal with that information of the seal of confession. You can,
okay,
for instance,
I have to
I think so,
interrupt a little bit because of time. And what is really interesting is that we are working in our countries that we experience that law restrictions or legal restrictions are kind of overlapping in the healthcare chaplaincy area with state law, secular law, and like Sebastian Farr explained, the church law, and with questions of confidentiality, we see that things are overlapping in a way. So I think what I really learned are if you distinguish between using values, that's really helpful. And I found that your fifth value, privacy, actually is an addition to the Georgetown mantra of 4 principles, the autonomy and beneficency, non-maleficency, and justice, which are all covered by the 4 first values, and the 5th value, privacy, is actually kind of a new addition. So I take that with me. Yes.
In fact, I extended the 4 principles to 10 fundamental values in my book, Values in Dialogue, because I think the 4 principles are not sufficient, and we need much more relational values than Beauchamp and Childress do.
That's really helpful, and I see that Sebastian Farr is writing that down. So maybe you send an email to us with the with the publication, because that's I think really helpful. So thank you very much, Axel, for your presentation and the discussion that it caused. And so we turn to Sebastian Farr now, who is I don't know where he's located right now, in Zurich. No, so he's in Germany right now.
Actually, my hometown right now. I'll be back in Zurich on Friday.
So Sebastian Farr is working as an assistant teacher and researcher at the Institute for Social Ethics at the University of Zurich with theological ethicist Michael Kors. And he has done some research on the involvement and the roles of chaplains in ethical decision-making. So shared decision-making, as Renske Grösinger has already introduced us to. And his research interest is in clinical bioethics and healthcare chaplaincy and spiritual care. And that's what his talk will be about, his PhD project.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I hope you can see my shared screen.
Yes, perfect.
And the right one as well. All right. So this will be on my PhD project that I'm working on. Unfortunately, well, I would have liked to present you some first findings of that, of one of the stages that I'm planning on doing, but COVID-19 kind of struck that. I wanted to make a survey with hospital chaplains, but the coordinating chaplains, which helped me with that, asked me to postpone that. So I'll hopefully send that out on Friday, but so as for now, I can only present you with well, the concept behind it and my ideas on that. So this is what I would like to start with. So what are my ideas, my concept behind the project that I'm working on? And the first one, so I've structured that into these maybe like 3 topics. So I'm interested in the chaplain's professional identity. I think it is a consensus that ethical counseling is part of the healthcare chaplain's work. And that this ethical counseling or helping in ethical decision-making is not limited to structured forms. So for example, you can have ethical questions, discuss them, even though you're not part of the clinical ethics committee, or if you're just in a one-to-one conversation with a patient and it is not like run by the clinical ethics committee. But I would say ethical counseling is part of the genuine work of chaplains as a whole. So I would say that pastoral as well as ethical counseling aspects make up the professional identity of healthcare chaplains. The second topic would be the roles that chaplains take. Former research often try to ascribe certain roles or certain skill sets to chaplains in different settings. Like one of the most well-known ones would be the chaplain acts as the attorney of the patient. But I think they do have multiple roles, and especially multiple roles in one setting or one situation at one time, and they can move or switch between those roles. And the third topic that I'm interested in is the chaplain's position in the healthcare system or the hospital. They do become more and more engaged with the hospital as an entire system. And they do have a unique position in the hospital, which we just heard before. So they do come from the outside. They are not trained medical professionals for the most part. So I wonder if this unique position that they have and that allows them to act in certain ways would change if they do become more and more integrated in medical teams, in care providing teams, or for example, if the funding of the positions changes. So for example, in Germany, and I know that for Switzerland, that is true for some chaplains as well, they are paid for by the church and then sent to the hospital. But if that would change, like we see, for example, in many American hospitals, and the chaplains are paid for by the hospitals themselves, they move more towards the inside of the hospital system. So I wonder if that would change this outside position of them, or is that only connected to them having a pastoral background? These three topics, of course, are very interconnected. So you cannot have any kind of professional identity without taking over certain roles. So the overarching aim of the project that I'm working on would be kind of to explore the coping of healthcare chaplains with different professional roles when involved in ethical counseling and decision-making, as well as in providing pastoral care as one professional, as one person. So I hope with that I can contribute towards a professional theory of chaplaincy that involves both pastoral and ethic counseling aspects of the work at the same time and not have them separate. I also like to bring more attention to the ethical dimensions and applications of the healthcare chaplain's work, because I think everything that they do follows a certain maybe professional ethics, and also just help chaplains to position themselves among other staff inside the hospital system, and for them to better understand their specific contributions to different teams and processes they are involved with. So to give you a very brief overview of what I'm planning on doing and have designed so far, I do take a mixed methods approach as well, separated into stages. The first one being an online survey, which is quantitative. It will be emailed to chaplains in Germany, Austria, sorry. And Switzerland. It is sent out via coordinating chaplains to ensure data protection regulations, of course. And in that online survey, they are asked to provide some general information about themselves, the hospitals they work at, like the size, what stations and units they are assigned to, and if it's like a rural or a more urban environment, stuff like that. And then it comes to the more ethical questions, like what kind of ethic cases or ethical questions they have to deal with, how they get in contact with them, which kind of team constellations might lead to them being involved with those questions. And I'd like to use that information to maybe sort of exclude and put that in its own little paper. Because former research often looked at, well, mostly end-of-life care to explore how chaplains contribute to that. But I assume there's much more to the ethical questions that they have to deal with, and I haven't really found any kind of big data on that. So I'm hoping to get more or a first look into that. And I will also use some information of that and take that over into the second stage, which hopefully will make up the largest portion of my dissertation, which will contain some qualitative interviews. So at the end of the online survey, the chaplains can leave some contact information if they want to be involved with the interviews further on. That can of course not be linked to all the information they shared before. So I use that to gather some participants and to maybe like build up my own, for that project, database of contact information. And I would also like to try to pick a field of ethics conflict to maybe have a more comparable sample size during the interviews. And I would like to maybe not have that being end-of-life care, because most of the work has been done there, and I think more topics should be explored. But to not pick something out of random, I'm hoping I can build on the findings from the first stage. And during the interviews, I view them as sort of like expert interviews, because chaplains are of course experts of the work they're doing. And I'd like to focus with them on the different roles they take in different situations, what roles they think they should take, what they think they should contribute, and of course what others might think they should bring to the table. Maybe I can work with case studies as well and talk through those cases with them. And then I'm interested in how they would move between certain roles. I'll get back to that in just a second. And also, like, if there are some conflicts between professional roles, I think sharing of information would be a good example of that, because they might think, well, I'm part of a care providing team, so I should share information, but at the same time, I am a pastor, and I'm not sure whether I can share that information because it might be, it might fall under the seal of confession. So with that, I'd like to kind of try to create some ideal role types, like a spectrum, which you can, well, see in this very rough graphic down here. So you would have the ethics consultant on the one hand, on one side, and the pastoral care provider, the general pastoral care provider on the other side. And I assume they would, like in different situations, position themselves somewhere between those two extremes. And that might shift from situation to situation, and also in one patient contact, for example, as well. And how they cope with that move between different positions on that scale. I hope that gives you a brief overview of what I'm looking into, and I'm happy to take your feedback and thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, Sebastian Farr. Thank you very much for your introduction into your study, and I know that the questionnaire is ready and should be on the way. So kind of COVID-19 takes its toll on your project. I think there are a lot of connections to the other projects, so I'll just leave the floor open to your remarks or questions on methodology, on the construction and the concept of your research. Nika Höfler.
Yeah, sorry. Again, a question to your analysis method. It wasn't clear to me. That's always a question I have because it's so important for my research.
Mm-hmm.
Your survey method is clear to me, but what
Mm-hmm.
is your analysis method? How do you evaluate your data? Do you know that now or at the moment, or is it in progress? It wasn't really clear to me how you what you do with the data you in your survey.
So you mean from the first stage, the online survey?
The first stage, yeah.
Well, I'm hoping I'll be able to do some statistical analysis of that using R, which is a statistical programming language. The University of Zurich offers classes on that or courses for that, and some good support. So I've probably chosen that for practical reasons.
What's the number of questionnaires that you hope to collect?
I don't really know, actually. I know that in Austria, it isn't a very big sample size because they don't have a lot of Protestant chaplains apparently in hospitals. So that is one thing. I am focusing on Protestant chaplains of the main Protestant denominations. It's going to be some more in Switzerland, although I am focusing on the German-speaking part again, because I sadly don't know any French or Italian, so that makes it hard for me to translate. And I am not sure how great the response rate in Germany will be, and whether all the coordinating chaplains in all the state churches will be able to send that out. So I'm hoping to get a few. I'm not sure.
Okay. And for your second stage, you?
So well, in Münster, I get to know grounded theory, so that would definitely be an option.
Okay.
But so I still have to look into that and also do some more training on that before I think I should be properly able to do that.
So some classical qualitative method. Thank you.
Niels and Tom.
Thank you. You're speaking about grounded theory. I thought in your presentation you already have quite some concepts that you presuppose. So I'm wondering whether grounded theory will work then. But one of the questions is about these presupposed, at least I think, concepts. Is like in the slide 4, kind of juxtapose the ethical counselor and the pastoral care provider, and you call them two extremes. So you kind of seem to see a tension between pastoral care provider and the ethical counselor. And I did not really see the tension. Why is this a tension, and why is this a conflict? Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. I don't think I see a conflict between them per se, especially because I believe that both at the same time make up the professional identity of the chaplain. But at the same time, there are some chaplains who only want to do the pastoral work and don't want to have anything to do with ethical counseling. And maybe not that extreme, but you will have some which fall more on the other end of the spectrum. I've used those extremes just to mark the extremes, believing that chaplains would position themselves somewhere in between and on different positions on that spectrum. But I think trying to get those extremes would help me to more clearly identify where they position themselves. Does that answer your question in a way?
Well, I think they do. Like you said, you notice that some chaplains say, I do not want to get involved into ethical decision making. But you could also question, is ethical decision making not part of pastoral care providing? So could you juxtapose them like this, or is it just an element of it?
Well, I certainly do think it is an element of that, because, well, depending on your definition of ethics, I think even going to a patient, having a conversation with him, you follow some implied code of ethics. And I don't think you get out of ethical decision making when counseling someone, even pastorally, because at some point you probably will get asked, or they will tell you about the decisions they have to make. So I think it is genuine part of pastoral caregiving. But I think it is, in research, it is often treated as a separate thing. And I would like to push it more into just like the genuine professional theory of chaplaincy, because I believe it is a big part of it.
Sorry if I interrupt a little bit, looking for our time schedule, and I think what we just learned is, it's again the construction of professional identity of spiritual care providers or spiritual counseling or chaplaincy, which is actually the main question that we seem to focus on, and trying to develop different modes of empirical based understanding of what this professional identity is all about. And so I think Sebastian Farr's research focuses on is there a distinction between two aspects, pastoral and ethical? Axel Lijois,
yes,
the last,
just very, very, very short, but I see a possibility of another problem in that tension, not from the point of view of the chaplain, but of the other people involved, that I think a pastoral care provider will introduce and impose religious points of view in the ethical decision making, and we don't want to have religious points of view in the ethical discussion. Of course, is that a good point of view? But it happens. It happens.
I think so. I think you would get those kind of responses if you ask the chaplains what they have experienced, what other people think they should contribute, because they will probably have encountered that. Although when speaking to clinical ethicists who are not trained theologians, but maybe trained medical professionals, but work in that field, I think they often don't believe that after they have worked with chaplains who are trained in like ethical counseling.
Well, it points also back. It also points back to the point that we discussed with Renske. Sebastian, I have to say thank you very much for your presentation. And of course, with every presentation, we feel the need to discuss a little bit more, which is sad that we're not in Bologna and cannot continue for much longer and meet for lunch. But I now want to, so thank you again and good luck with the questionnaire. And I will turn over to Dilek Uçak-İkinci's presentation. Dilek is working with the University of Fribourg in Germany, or Freiburg in Germany, and also the University of Zurich in Switzerland. And she will introduce us to the case of Muslim healthcare chaplaincy. She studied in Gießen, studied Islamwissenschaft, science of Islam religion, sociology and Turkology. And she has a lot of experience within different educational and training settings, academic training settings, and she's now working, doing her PhD, worked at the chair for spiritual care in Zurich. Simon Penkeller is her guide or Dr. Father that she works with. So welcome, Dilek, to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Roser, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I want to, do you hear me and see everything? Okay, thank you. I want to contribute one point because I'm at the same time a PhD student of the Swiss Center of Islam and Society at University of Freiburg. That means I have 2 supervisors, 2 of the topic. I want to thank you that I have the opportunity being with you on this panel, even virtually. My research is on the Muslim healthcare chaplaincy in Switzerland. Today, I will try to give you an insight into my ongoing research. Let me give you an outline of my presentation. Firstly, I am going to give you a brief introduction to my research questions and the current developments of Muslim chaplaincy. Then I will report about the ongoing situation in Switzerland. After, I will move to show you with which data I work and how. Finally, I will give you an example case on which I would like to discuss some questions with you. My research asks the following main questions. What is Islamic spiritual care and what are its principles and concepts? Which structural and theological requirements does it need to be implemented in hospital life in the way that everyone involved benefit? From an Islamic theological perspective, we find a lot of ongoing efforts on how the Islamic chaplaincy could be or is conceived in view of Islamic tradition and sources. The search for a concept is mainly led by pragmatic or programmatic approaches in the history of Islamic thought. On the other hand, there is already a practical knowledge and experience which should be reflected too. The empirical work can, can deliver and contribute to the theoretical knowledge with reliable information about structural, educational, and theological needs for Muslim chaplaincy and its implementation in a secular hospital setting. With my research, I want to connect practical questions with the academic knowledge and generate relevant questions to the newly emerging Islamic theology at universities in Western countries. I believe that this is important to serve urgent needs of Muslim patients. Exploring some Muslim chaplaincy, you will notice that there is a rise of interest in these issues due to the number of Muslims living in Western countries. This is partly right, but not the whole picture. The Muslim chaplaincy is currently undergoing rapid and substantial developments in various countries. I reviewed the developments of Muslim healthcare chaplaincy, how it's organized and delivered in 4 countries. 2 Muslim countries, that is Turkey and Iran, and 2 countries with significant Muslim populations, that is Great Britain and Netherlands. My review led to remarkable insights. The examples of Turkey and Iran show that social change has increased the demand for spiritual guidance in Muslim countries as well. And this need is addressed by developing new models of Muslim spiritual care. My result so far is that the new emerging profession of Muslim healthcare chaplain is an issue in countries with more Muslim population, shows a common development of the new role which differs from the imam or other religious leaders in Islam. After these results on international level, let's look in the developments in Switzerland. Muslims in Switzerland make up 5.5% of the population today. As in many European countries, Muslim healthcare chaplaincy in Switzerland is discussed in similar yet different circumstances. Switzerland is a very decentralized country and has a cantonal healthcare regulations. Also, the fact that Muslim chaplaincy is mainly organized on a demand basis This results in significant disparities between the different cantons concerning the approaches and levels of its implementation. Since 2016, new academic trainings are initiated, like the MicroMaster program, which will begin this fall. All Muslim healthcare chaplain work is on voluntary basis, except the first employed chaplain this year at the University Hospital Bern, who is paid for 4 hours per week. Despite some steps already taken, the development of further education program and the establishment in the official institution of the profession still have to be addressed in the future. So let's discuss methods and material of my research. The empirical part of my research is based on case studies. The material which is examined are cases that are written as working reports in German Einsatzberichte for the association QAMS. QAMS is an association which coordinates volunteer chaplains. My cases come from 19 volunteer chaplains who allowed me to use their reports. I have 121 reports and additional 78 verbatims. These reports include a description of the case, the task, and intervention with particular sexes or challenges or concerns from the view of the chaplain. The cases are analyzed, studied according to various questions. The first of the question is the area of function and the task fields. The results show a variety of task fields. This list provides an insight into the working practice of Muslim chaplain and tasks of Muslim chaplaincy. But of course, it doesn't claim to be complete as this is a selection. Nevertheless, this insight shows us very well that many different tasks and competences are needed for this work. Supportive accompaniment like listening, comforting, being emotional company in crisis situation, or being consulted on religious and ethical matters. One other point is the rituals, religious practice like recitation, prayer, or organizing other rites. And the bridging, liaison, and systemic counseling is the field where chaplain link between patient, family, and clinical staff, for example, and training staff and providing knowledge about Muslim patients and Islamic topics like death or mental health are done too. After classifying the fields and tasks, about 10 cases are selected as an example from the total number of cases for a deeper understanding. Analysis and interpretation of the practice. The selected cases are exemplary and do not claim to be generalizable as is normally the case in a qualitative research. Nevertheless, I hope that the study and the interpretation of the individual cases will sharpen and broaden the question for the practical, theological, and structural view on the concrete Muslim chaplaincy practice. The examples are rewritten by me with the relevant information and are shown to the chaplains if they are well understood and okay. And for example, theological topics concerned in the examples will be studied and systematized in the view of the Islamic theology. Finally, I want to look at an example case for the task fields, so-called preaching and counseling. Mr. A is an imam who is volunteer chaplain for the local hospital since years. He is contacted during a lecture in a mosque because he couldn't be reached over the phone. It's an emergency. A baby died suddenly shortly after birth. The Christian chaplain informs him that the parents have many questions about the funeral and the further procedures. When Mr. A arrives at the hospital, he talks to the father and finds out the details of the baby's death. The baby died suddenly 1 day ago without any previous signs after a normal birth. The father explains to the chaplain they want to follow Muslim rites as soon as possible. The chaplain informs the father about the Muslim funeral rituals and possibilities of burial in the local area. The father asks the chaplain to come in within the room to his wife, as they still have questions together. He informs the chaplain that his wife is not Muslim. In the room, the chaplain meets the mother, who is very calm despite the noticeable sadness. After discussing the possibility of a Muslim burial, the mother asks the chaplain that she doesn't understand why she, as a mother, is not allowed to be present during a burial. She wants to be there. Her husband has told her that in Islam, the women are not allowed to be present during the funeral. The chaplain confirms that she can, of course, be there if she wants to, and that from a religious point of view, there is no obstacle. He says that he understands very well that she wants to be there. In the next days, he helps the family to prepare the funeral of the baby and buries the baby as wish of the family. In summary, Muslim healthcare chaplaincy is an emerging field with an emerging professional role. It's relatively unestablished in Switzerland. Trying to address the issue of Muslim chaplaincy in Switzerland, I would like to use case study methods. I want to come to the end of my presentation and want to do a very risky thing. But I want to use the opportunity of having the experts in this panel and ask, with this chance, a few specific questions. I want to ask you if the case studies method is a good approach for my specific needs to find out the theological, educational, and structural needs of Muslim healthcare chaplaincy. What are the weaknesses and advantages of my approach? To remind, my original questions are what and where Muslim chaplains do what they do, what challenges and questions they are asked, what kind of training, education, and qualification they need for their work. I thank you for your attention after an exciting and intensive morning. Looking forward to your questions and feedbacks.
Thank you very much, Dilek. A really interesting project. Makes me really curious about your cases. I'll open the discussion, and again, we should have about 5 to 8 minutes for questions and discussions. And I see that Axel Lichois has already opened the microphone and also has Renske Kreuziger.
No, I don't have a question at this moment.
Okay, Renske.
Thank you, Dilek. A really interesting presentation. What first comes up is that case study are interesting and an interesting tool to use, especially in the case you presented. Maybe it would be good if you have an interesting case from a Muslim chaplain to follow up on that. So to go back to chaplain who has written the case and then ask specific questions on the background in theology you are interested in and how the theology is connected to the daily life, the daily practice of a chaplain. Because I think there can be some tension. You have, on the one hand, the maybe a strict theology, and then you have the practice of mom who wants to be there at the funeral, and then you have like, how are they dealing with that kind of issues? So maybe to follow up on case studies or something like that.
Thank you, Renske.
Did I understand that right? Just curiosity. So after the case is written, the narrative is written, you would go back to the chaplain and then ask the specific research questions that you found out during the analysis of the case, and ask that to the chaplain and use that as a research tool to identify concepts or...
No, not really. This step I didn't think. It's only to be sure that I understood every detail of the case in a good way. Because
but Renske's suggestion, if maybe I got it wrong, but Renske's suggestion would be to go back to the chaplain with your analysis of the case and ask the specific questions. Did I understand you right, Renske, or wrong?
Yeah, that's right. Because I think only a case study might not give all the information you need about the underlying theology, Islamic theology. So you might need to go back to the chaplain who has written the case study, or to really have the full answer on your research question, I think.
Yeah, I have a question, Renske. I do this, but I didn't do it I did because I was curious about which motivation did the person done this in the way how it was done. How could I bring this information in a systematic way in my research? What should I do, you think?
I don't know if I understand you correctly, but there's a term called member check. We use it. Then you have the first interview or case study, and then you go back to the one and do a member check, like, okay, this is what I understand. Is it correctly if I see this? And then they can add some information, like filling
that's now what I'm doing. But the next step you proposed. Member check I'm doing.
Okay. And what's your question? Is your question, what do I after the member check, or?
No, my question is, I thought you proposed me to see more in detail in how the decision was made in a theological way or another way, and this information, should I do, for example, written interviews? That's my question.
Yes, if the case studies and the member check does not provide all the information, I would put all the information you need in an in-depth interview, and then you have a chance to really ask the chaplains what's behind it, and not only get information from them, but also it's a really good tool to get the information you want. Yes.
Yeah.
I think Nika and Niels have a comment to this discussion.
So you mean just as an additional survey? Yes, I would also propose this, that maybe the case studies are enough, but I don't think so, because I know it from our researchers. That you need some something that gives you detailed information. Maybe there are 5 or 6 interviews. Maybe this is enough, but you need something, you need a further insight, a deeper insight than the case studies will give you. But I think the case studies are a good start and a good basis, and then you can add some detailed information with another survey method, maybe interviews or something, or yeah, whatever.
Thank you.
That would be my proposal.
Niels.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, and I think you have already collected all the case studies, right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you could have put a question as a element of a case study. What were your theological motives? But the question is always, in every practical theological research, I think, whose theology? And that will also be the case in your research, I think. So is it your theology, or is it the, and there is some, it is a bit contested, but there is that model of the four voices, perhaps you know it, is from Christian theology. And they kind of distinction between formal theology, which is the official theology, and also, for example, espoused theology and operant theology. And I thought about in the case you show, you see that there is perhaps a formal theology of women not allowed to be present during the funeral, but this chaplain, Muslim chaplain, has a different theology. He thinks, oh, that's not a problem at all. So there are different levels and different theologies at stake at that moment. So perhaps this distinction could help you to analyze your cases.
Yes, thank you.
So, dear friends, colleagues, it's 11 o'clock now, and I think we really have to come to the end of our meeting. I think one of the main outcomes of our discussion and panel today is that it's really worth getting together with a real focus on research and chaplaincy. It's really helpful, and we have different formats that we can join. The one is the European Network for Healthcare Chaplaincy, or the research part of it, the EuARe project, where there's also the case study project going on, and different fields, but also using this platform of the European Academy of Religion, which I think is strategically very important to be present with our special interest in chaplaincy, to be present at the discourse area of the European Academy of Religion. I found that we have similar questions in all our research projects, but we have very different situations, very different contexts, cultures, religions, and countries, of course, and not regarding language. But there's so many different situations, but we focus on similar questions. We have one common theme, and that's the conceptualizing professional identity of chaplaincy. And we have both volunteers and fully paid by different institutions, fully paid chaplains. And we're working on how to conceptualize the professional identity between the religious, the pastoral, the counseling, the ethical counseling. And we also have similar approach to how to do research, empirical research, but we really learn from each other on methodological questions, how to analyze, what methods to use, and how to do the empirical research, the sampling, and all that. And we learned that the case study project is very open, but maybe it's not sufficient to the questions that we have to raise. So I think this has been really inspiring, and it's an ongoing work. I think it would be a good idea to follow up on this panel at the next meeting of the European Association, which I think will be either in Bologna or Münster.
Münster, yeah.
It will be Münster.
Yeah, it will be Münster.
So it would be great to meet in person. We will definitely keep you updated and to use this forum, and maybe then we'll also have a larger audience in order to have a discussion. Thank you for sticking to the rules and not being too long.
Thank you very much.